Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. How are you today? As always, I am wishing you a great day and an awesome life. For today's episode, I thought I'd try something a little different. I think it's going to be interesting. I want to dive into a topic that we've never covered before on the podcast. And frankly, it's a topic I know very, very little about: mental health within the entrepreneurial community. So to really understand this important topic, I've invited Parham Parastaran to join us. Parham is an Iranian-American entrepreneur and author with a passion for discussing mental health issues in the business community. After fleeing Iran during the Iranian Revolution, Parham became the epitome of the American dream. He built a multi-million-dollar franchise business from a single store to 16 locations. Although he enjoyed entrepreneurial success, he had a secret. He suffered from severe depression and addiction. A rock bottom moment led to signing himself up for psychoanalysis. Now, over 15 years later, after that first session, he chronicles his powerful story in his new memoir, Perfect Pain. And today, he's joining us on the Modern Leadership Podcast. Parham, so good to have you. How are you today?
I am wonderful and so good to be with you, Jay. So good to be with you.
And I'm very interested in jumping into this topic. But before we do, give us a little background, give us a little history of who you are and how you came to be about this podcast.
I was born in Iran, as you said. I was born in Iran in 1971 and immediately came to, within a year, was in the United States at Oklahoma State, where my dad, Stillwater, where my dad went to doing his undergrad in engineering. Did that, went back to Iran. And so at this time I was around 5 and never really intending to come back to the United States. My dad, being Western educated, was in a nice position in Iran and was up and coming and was going places. Then in 1979, the revolution happened. We were not Muslim. We were Baha'is by birth. And the revolution was the Islamic Revolution. And so basically anybody that was not Muslim wasn't really welcome there, to make it very simple. And we had, through a series of events and, my dad was almost assassinated, we decided that we had to get out of America. And so we made some arrangements to get out. My dad fled literally on a few days' notice, but then made arrangements for my mom and my brother to leave. At the same time, the Iran-Iraq war was going on. The Tehran airport gets bombed. We're sort of stuck. Long story short, through trains, automobiles, and walking, and name it, we finally escaped into Karachi, Pakistan, where there we got to the U.S. and they gave us political asylum, and we ended up in California. And from there, so that time I was 4th grade. I just went from school to school to school to school to school till I ended up in Champaign. I moved about 11 times in a 5-6 year period. Ended up in Champaign, Illinois. Went to the University of Illinois here. Studied psychology in undergrad, but really I was trying to become a tennis pro. And I was a tennis pro, but I wanted to become a coaching pro and build a business of running an academy. And I was embarrassed quite shamefully at a bank where they sort of laughed at my idea of building a tennis center. And I think from that moment on, and I talk about that a little bit in the book, but from that moment on, the shame and embarrassment I felt from being denied just sort of fueled a fire under me to never have that happen again. And what I came to the conclusion at that time, many, many years ago, was that if I get money and I make lots and lots of money, I will never be disrespected again. And then ultimately, like you said, I got into the automotive business, started with the store, eventually raised it to 16 store. I sold all my real estate to a REIT out of the East Coast, and I sold my actual other company to a publicly traded company out of the East Coast, as a matter of fact, as well too. And but during that two decades of being in business, had lots of up and downs, mainly because of my drug addiction and just general psychological makeup. Because I was fueled by motivations of shame and other things, I really wasn't very grounded. So clearly, it came with a lot of damage as far as highs and lows, and it was very unintegrated. So that's the gist of it. I got married, luckily was able to somehow grind through the marriage during the really difficult times, three beautiful girls. And now I sold my company about a year and a half ago, and just published a book and sort of trying to do this. And with the goal to try to talk to entrepreneurs, and not just entrepreneurs, but any human being with difficulties with depression and the things that they don't really like to talk about, and being honest with themselves.
And this is an absolutely incredible story. I mean, there's so many things that you ups and downs and challenges that you went through, and then opportunity that opened up. Obviously being in Iran during that time and having to flee and being separated as a family, but then finding a way to get into Pakistan and get over to the United States, and then building this entrepreneurial venture is just an incredible story. And there's so many directions that we could go, but I want to make sure we have time to talk about the topic on hand today is this mental health and the challenges that entrepreneurs go through. But before we do that, let me ask you, how much of your drive do you think comes from nature? You were born with it. This is who you were. You would have been this way no matter what challenges you went through. And nature, or nurture the experiences that you went through and built up upon.
It is an amazing question, and it's going to be a very difficult question to answer. And the best I'm going to be able to do is give you my hypothesis and what I think about it. The quick answer, I think it's a combination of both. I think the nature part was the things that were the characteristics that I had that helped me with being an entrepreneur. So, for example, for some reason, I was very lucky that it was very easy for me to get along with people. I was always really, really good. My personality, somehow people used to like my energy, they like. And so it was very easy for me to get people to like me. And that was definitely something I was born with, the ability to, socially be able to handle myself. And so that clearly helped with my entrepreneurial career. I think the nature part is the things that you have certainly talked about, I'm sure. And we use that word grit, people with grit and fight and the determination. And that part was absolutely a function of my shame of being an immigrant from Iran, being here during the Iran hostage crisis. And one thing that I hadn't mentioned yet, Jake, is that I was also abused when I was a child. I was sexually abused for 2 years of my life. And so, and this was in Iran. So there's just a lot of deep down shame about who I was. And I had parents that I didn't really connect with, and parents that were quite narcissistic in the way that they managed. They were loving, but they loved in a limited way. So I had all kinds of things going on simultaneously that was just tearing away at my core and produced just deep insecurities, deep shame, and all of this stuff. And the only thing that I subconsciously could figure out to overcome the shame that I felt was to win. And winning could be anything, right? Winning could have been, coming to a new school, which I did 11 different times, and then finding my way to be popular. And then winning could be, of course, financially. Winning could be getting the date of that girl that you've always admired. It was just anything external that boosted my self-esteem, I became addicted to. And so that was nature. And I don't believe I would have had the drive to care about money. I think I would have been successful. I think I naturally would have been. I might have continued my tennis career. I might have, been a great librarian or whatever. I just don't sure I would have been 100% motivated that all I wanted was money and power.
And so let's take this conversation to the next level. Let's talk about our entrepreneurial listeners and our business leaders that are out there. This topic is something, and I mentioned it in the pre-intro, and even before we hit record, you and I were talking about it. And I wonder if, I don't know a lot about this topic. And I think sometimes it's hard to talk about because we want to tiptoe around the topic, or we want to make sure that we're politically correct. And so this episode, let's take it head on. What has your research found as you've looked at mental health and in entrepreneurial circles and the business community? What have you found? And then where do we go from there?
Yeah, so there's different types of people, but what I really find is when I look at some people that are driven to incredible heights, what I look at and what I try to look at is their parenting. How did they grow up? Okay, that's the first thing I do. I want to know about their parents. I want to know about their childhood. And basically everything I feel is somewhat traceable back to childhood or some type of core injury. But what my research has found and what my conclusion is that, and it's not all people, but most people that have more, exceptional drive, that for some reason they need to win as opposed to want to win. They need to have extra money or more money than the neighbor next door as opposed to want. And when I see and I look at people, I can tell. And the questions that I have to ask or I can obviously notice is childhood. And I usually find out that it's something. For example, I'm not going to name some people, but I know some very, very, very highly successful people. I know one of them is overweight and has always battled being overweight as a child, okay, and was made fun of, okay? You hear this story all the time. He's a perfect example. He's a billionaire, by the way, okay? But he, over time, I'm sure that had some effect on him. I know other people that have had the same exact thing with me with being an immigrant. We see this all over the place. And, I go to my local hospital, and I think 70% of the doctors there are from India, Pakistan, or some other country, and they're not from America. And so you have to ask yourself why. Why is it that they choose these very prestigious, high-power positions? It's to overcome and to ward off some feelings or insecurities or shame that was bothering them from.
And it's very interesting, Parham, as you talk about this, because for a number of years I lived in San Jose, California. San Jose is a melting pot. I mean, there's an awful lot of different cultures, different backgrounds there, and we see an awful lot of immigrants in the area, and they're very successful. I mean, working very hard. Some of the leaders at these tech companies of software and products that all of us use every single day are immigrants and are hard charging, work hard. And, so I can relate to what you're saying.
They are. I mean, and then on the flip side of it, I have some people that I know that are smart an attorney or a banker, and they become a banker, very conservative. And you look at their upbringings, and it was relatively quiet in their upbringing. They had a mom and dad. They were properly regulated. They had good self-esteem issues. They got regular praise. They had communications. They had, they're internally weren't weak. They're solid. And I look at their occupations and I go, it's really interesting, the occupations that they chose. They chose something that was very steady, calm, and they didn't need the high. See, sometimes really going after high levels of achievement, it's no different than a drug or food or anything else. It gives you incremental high. So in my case, I had one store, and I'll never forget. I thought when I had the one store, I thought if I had 3 stores, just 3 stores, I'm going to have a pretty nice living. I'm going to make a pretty good living, and that's going to be amazing. But I opened up my 3rd store, and it felt exactly the same way I opened up my 2nd store. And then my next goal was 8 stores, and I'll never forget this. I opened up the 8th store. In fact, my license plate said CarX8, which was the name of my stores. And so 8 was the goal of the number of stores I wanted. But by the time I got to that 8th store, Jake, the feeling was the same, the exact same feeling. I didn't recreate it. I got the high, and then it evened off, right? The same way if you're using cocaine or alcohol, right? You do a little bit, you get that high, and you have to continue to take in that stimulus to maintain that high.
And you have to kind of increase your doses, right? To continue to maintain the same high that you've experienced in the past, you got to go a little bit harder, work a little bit harder, open up a 10th store, a 16th store.
Yep, or become a millionaire. Then you become a billionaire. Then it's the same thing. The same feelings that you got, 3 years ago and 10 years ago, building everything that you were doing, just became you became desensitized to it, and you needed more until you one day realized I can't continue to live. It's basically another way to look at it, Jake, is like imagine a balloon that I got to keep filled, and I just got to keep putting air into it, right? And that air basically substitutes self-esteem, okay? And I have to continuously put air in it by achieving, winning, whatever it is that you're going for and needing, not wanting, but needing.
Now, when we talk about this, are we talking about a certain subset of entrepreneurs? Are we talking about that every entrepreneur has these challenges that, they may manifest differently, and you may have different types of strivings, different types of addictions? Or is this really a subset of our entrepreneurship, our group that we're talking to here?
I think there's a subset of that. And if I understand your question correctly, I think, are you saying that is it something that's kind of standard amongst entrepreneurs, or there's a group of, a certain amount of entrepreneurs within entrepreneurs that fall into this category?
Kind of what I'm thinking is we've got a lot of people listening. I'm a listener here as well. And I'm asking myself, okay, what are some of these things that are manifesting in my life that are, how am I getting, if you will, using the drug terminology, how am I getting high through my business? What are the things that I'm trying to either compensate for or strive towards? What are some of you talked about a core wound when you're younger, I'm asking myself this question, and should I be asking myself, or should I be asking this about maybe others that I work with?
Yeah, I think you should. I think we should all always be asking why we do the things we do. Not all of them are going to end up with the answers that I have for my entire life. My answers and the whys, and as I continue to ask the whys, was that I did a lot of things for the wrong reasons. I don't necessarily regret it. Okay. In some ways, I feel pretty lucky that it all turned out the way it turned out. Okay. But when I keep really, really asking of why I do those things, you have to find out what feeling does it create for you. So when you're doing your podcast and you're interviewing people and you say, well, why do I do this? And you might say, well, I do it because I enjoy teaching people something. Then I ask, well, why do you enjoy teaching people something? And if we keep delving and keep asking why, you may find out that what it really has to do with is that some level of praise that you needed, and it fulfills a need that you had for something to do with maybe when you were a kid, or something to do with your father, something to do that impresses your father. Maybe the fact that you're teaching somebody somehow correlates to some relationship that was quite off maybe with your father. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I want to ask you a little bit further on this because, you've spent a number of years going through kind of this psychoanalysis and going through counseling to kind of help you identify these types of things. And now our normal listener here is asking themselves, where do we go from here? How is this applicable to me?
Yeah, I think for starters, I would say just because you have some core injuries and you are doing things to, ward those off, or, using them as healing, it doesn't make it bad. I think the biggest part is if you get into the areas which we can go talk about but unfortunately, many of the people that we're referring to, very successful people, also have a big portion of their life that they self-sabotage. Self-sabotage, Jay, can come from, obviously, what I went through was with drugs and alcohol. Self-sabotage comes through gambling. It could come with people that have 5 divorces and 6 divorces. And you go, why do they continuously have terrible luck, as we use the phrase in relationships?
And Parm, an area that I see this a lot, just to cut in a little bit, and I want to share an area I see this often. I work with a lot of lawyers, and the lawyers that we're working with start out, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year in revenue. And as we start to grow, we see them start to self-sabotage their business as they get around $1 million, because in their mind, they are not $1 million business owner. In their mind, they are a $500,000 or a $600,000 business owner. And so it scares them as they start to grow beyond, what they see themselves as.
Jake, you're a psychologist. You didn't even know it. So that's it. That's what you call narcissistic behavior disorders. So essentially what you just described is that within narcissistic behavior disorders, we see these with incredibly successful people. We see these with presidents, okay? We see these with powerful people. The head of the IMF sodomizes and he's going to be possibly the next president of France, sodomizes the help at a hotel. Why? That's just insane. So what you just described is that as they are winning, as they are achieving, okay, their self-esteem, okay, is unnaturally inflated, and they keep butting up against to where their core strength can't handle it. So, for example, if I've done training, I'll use a simple as that. I've done training, and now I can handle anything up to 8th grade math. My core can handle up to 8th grade math. And now I'm doing, and I keep moving fast. And next thing you know, as a 7th grader, I'm doing 9th grade math. I can't handle that. And that is the point that you're talking about.
And so I intentionally shut down, right? I intentionally turn off my growth.
I use. For me, it happens. I can tell when this is happening. I have a dashboard I create in my head. Sometimes it happens for me with sports. I'm a pretty good golfer, and all of a sudden I find myself doing random things in the middle of a round to almost fail against my buddies, especially if we're gambling a little bit or doing something. And that's the exact moment I know I'm having my little bit of my issue right there. I am not comfortable having too much success. And that is simply as a result of our core strength is not strong enough for that. It wasn't built for that. The other analogy, if you don't mind, I'll just tell you real quick, is if you're an architect and I say, hey, I want to build a 20-story building, okay, you're going to build a foundation for a 20-story building. And up to that 20 stories, it can handle whatever it gives it to it, right? It can handle it. But what if I tell my architect, I want you to design a 20-story building, so he builds the foundation for a 20-story. And then later I say, nah, I'm going to make this 40. It won't be able to handle it. And as a human being, an entrepreneur, as a lawyer, the ones that you just described, they weren't set out to say, because we don't know how we're going to evolve. So maybe they thought they were going to be a $500,000 lawyer, okay? And that's how they were equipped to handle. But then they become a building. They weren't constructed initially for that. So they got to work on it. That's all. They got to just work on it. They can get there and then rework themselves and rework their core strengths, which is ultimately their esteem issues.
And that foundation can be reworked and re-strengthened. It can be worked on. It can be a 40-story building on that foundation. It just needs to be reworked. And the idea that came to my mind as you were talking about, I am not a good golfer. I'm the opposite of a good golfer. That makes me a bad golfer. And I always shoot 110. Like always. And it doesn't matter if I shoot good on the front nine, then I'll screw it up on the back. Or if I have a terrible front nine, I'll bring it on in the back. But at the end of the day, subconsciously, without even knowing it, I'll add up my score at the end. It'll always be either 109, 110, or 111. I mean, it's like you could set your clock to it. And this is that same deal that we're talking about, that in my mind, subconscious, buried deep, I'm a 110 golfer. I can't get 90. I can't get 100. So now if I identify this, let's say I'm a listener and I understand that I need to get past this $1 million block, or I need to get past this 110 golfing block. What do I do now to help grow to that next level, help get my mind around this next level?
Well, the fact that you're even able to have that thought is good, because then you're aware of it. So the quick answer is it starts with self-awareness. And truthfully, Jake, just getting professional help sometimes. And I'm not talking about necessarily doing what I did, where I was, I've done 1,200 hours of psychoanalysis and sitting on a couch for two to 3 days a week. It doesn't have to be that, but it certainly can be talking to somebody for once a month. It certainly could be having some conversation and some enlightenment into where you stand from a core, where your core strengths are. And I'm talking psychological core strengths. So I think the awareness, and I think sometimes just getting help, and it's no differently than other things, surrounding yourself with people that know a little bit about this stuff, people that have gone from that 500 to the million, just as an example to use, people that have gone through little barriers that they've done, and then talking to them and say, well, what was going on with you during these barrier moments? I call them these make or break moments, like you have at the casino when you're playing blackjack. You have these big hands that all of a sudden, if you win these couple of big hands, it changes the betting structure and how do you go forward. It's the same thing.
Yeah, and this is so fascinating, and I love this. Surrounding yourself, be around people that you want to become, because they will lift you up. They'll answer the questions. They will give you the motivation, the inspiration. It's all about masterminds. It's all about mentorship. It's all about surrounding yourself with the good, the great, the positive. But I want to ask you a little bit about the embarrassment or shame of getting help. And I'll tell you an example. My wife and I do not have marital troubles. I'll say this on the line. It's recorded. Everybody needs to know this. My wife and I do not have marital trouble. We're actually in a great space as a couple. But we talked about going and getting, couples therapy, not because we need help from a position of our marriage is falling apart, but because we believe that we can take it to the next level. And so how do we get around this shame or this embarrassment? You just heard me stutter over telling the entire audience, what I'm about this. It's hard to say. It's hard to do. How do we get over this shame?
Just say it. Just do it. The way to get around it is to try to logically think that, is it ever shameful if you're raising a child and that your kid comes up to you and says, Dad or Mom, I don't know how to do this. I'm not equipped to do this, right? We encourage that and we say, what a great question, honey. Let me show you, right? Well, then what stops as we become adults? What stops? Are we now all of a sudden supposed to be perfect and knowing? And it's the idea that we should know. It's the idea that we're perfect. It's the idea that it's inappropriate or shameful or a disgrace if I am not as good as something as I can, and especially in marriage, to be able to say, you know what, either I'm having trouble and I'd like to do a better job in our marriage, or we want to take it to the next level. And as you're talking about your case, to me, if you can admit that, that I was talking about that core strength, just add a bunch of units that you just got to your core strength, because that's a huge deal to be able to do. And I think the world doesn't reward it, and I think that's one of the problems is with the reward systems. We reward macho, tough. And I think we're getting better, by the way, as a society. But I think, we think it's, we like the guy who's the alpha, and he's tough and whatnot. And what I consider an alpha is a guy who can tell him that he was abused when he was 9 years old by another male for 2 years. That's just what happened. It's not something I can change. It's part of who I am. It's integrated inside of me.
As you were talking about this, I was thinking about my daughter, who is a very good student and gets very good grades. And she comes home the other day and she says, Dad, I'm going to be late home from school tomorrow because I'm staying after for tutoring. And I'll be honest with you, when I heard that, I was proud. I mean, here's a daughter or a person who wants to improve and is going and seeking the help that will take her to the next level. And so how do we take that same thought, that same pride of, a daughter that's going to go and take tutoring so that she can get better in education to our lives, where we talk about whether it be taking our business to the next level or taking our personal lives or our marriages to the next level by going out and seeking those who have either walked the path before or who are professionally trained to kind of look at your situation and help you identify the mental barriers and the roadblocks that you're facing on your road to increased stability and increased opportunity.
Yeah, if you see somebody's at a coffee shop reading a book, and it says, make your brain smarter. And you go, wow, that guy's, that's great. He's reading, he's trying to learn something. But if you see a guy next to him reading a book that says your depression and shame, you think he's weaker. You think he's got something wrong with him, when in fact, it's really no different. Does have something wrong with him or something that's challenging him, but that's as simply as that. When we were kids, and at some point we were very curious, right? We're just curious about the next thing, learning about this, improving this. And then it just seems like at some age, some imaginary age, and I don't know what this is, and this is something I'm really starting to think about a lot, is why do we lose our curiosity? And curiosity is, and by that I mean kind of the way you're describing daughter, where you can ask questions, and you can be wrong, and you can be inquisitive about your psyche, right? So we could be inquisitive about our why I'm losing weight or not losing weight, or how do I get in shape? But I can't get inquisitive about how can I get my mind in shape.
It's all about asking, what do you want more? Do you want the short-term embarrassment, to avoid the short-term embarrassment or the short-term, experience? Or do you want to have this long-term success? Do you want to have this growth? I go back to the lawyers that we've been talking about a little bit here that have this mental block at $1 million. And really for them to overcome this, it starts with big momentum. Just start working towards it. Then as you get close to it, acknowledge that it's there. Acknowledge that you're having this fear, that you may be self-sabotaging, and start to surround yourself with people who can help take you to the next level. Ask yourself, what do I want more? The avoidance of the short-term pain or the enjoyment of the long-term opportunity?
And the reason I know one thing that I've discovered for sure since publishing the book is that I have had numerous people, and locally in town, very prominent, some of them very prominent, that I'm acquaintances with, that have asked me to breakfast or coffee and sat one-on-one. And then they share with me their challenges with depression. And they're like, I totally can relate to this book. I can relate to these things. And I listen to that, and I'm glad that they can tell me. But you can tell that they're just comfortable now telling me because they know that I told, that they can relate to that. So you just mentioned that surround yourself, okay? And that's the way you do it. That's one of the ways you do it. You seek out somebody who is challenged with depression or challenged with a little mental health. And you don't need to share it to the world and write a book about it, but you certainly can ask them about it and feel less embarrassed, at least a baby step towards that. Like I think the word would have just used the momentum, just gain get a little momentum with being able to talk to one person in private about it. But the number of people that have come up to me in private, and in fact, I've gotten letters from some wives of very prominent people sharing their story, and it gives me 100% validation that it exists way more than we think. And the reason we don't see it as much as we think is because all we see are the byproducts of it, are the meltdowns, the self-sabotages, the divorces, all of the irresponsibility with money, all of these type of things. But we're not seeing the other part. We're just seeing because people aren't coming out and really talking about it. But I believe it's there at a very, very troubling level. And it's going to continue.
And it's such a fascinating conversation, and one that I was very interested to have on this podcast. Like I said, 220 episodes recorded, and this is the first time that we've dove into it, and I really appreciate that. Alas, because of time, we need to move on to our last section, which is learning from leaders. Ask you a few questions, learn a little bit more about you personally. How does that sound, Parham?
Sounds great.
All right, first question. Book currently on your Kindle or bedside table?
I have a lot of different ones, but right now I have The Drama of a Gifted Child. It's a book written by Alice Miller, very deep psychological book, probably about like 50 pages long, that I've read at least 20 times. It's something I read often and over, just to remind me and help me with some of the challenges I have. The other one I have, because I just recently went back to read, was Blink. I forget.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I remember getting my MBA and going to grad school, and I was already in business. And people asked me, did the MBA help you with your entrepreneurial career? I said, it absolutely did. It certified that I should just keep trusting my gut feelings.
I paid $50,000 a semester to learn to trust my gut.
Yeah. No, and actually I meant that in a positive way. So I learned tools that basically validated, but at the end of the day, it would just be my gut feelings tended to be what those tools and those spreadsheets would spit out.
Absolutely. How about your leadership superpower?
I took your test, and it was the confidence something.
Yeah, the confident leader. So you're referring to the leadership superpower assessment over on the website that asks about 20 questions and identifies what platform you lead from. So you lead from the confidence platform.
Yes, I took your test, and that's exactly what it told me. Yes.
Wonderful. All right. How about a leadership mantra, quote, or philosophy that you live by?
Well, the one and I think it's really relevant to today, that this has become probably my mantra for the last 6 or 7 years, and it's that you get what you think about, good or bad, you're right. I'm a deep believer in that your mind brings, people, circumstances, events into your life of what you want. And at many times, I wanted negative outcomes. I wanted pain, and pain would come into my life. It could come in the pain of financial challenges or whatever. And at times, because it would be, positive things. But at the end of the day, I felt like I had absolute control, 100% control of my life simply by the way I thought.
And I'm a big believer in universal choreography. And I think that the universe is providing opportunities for all of us, but we need to be intentional about looking for them, seeking them out, and seeing them as they come into your life. So wonderful quote. Thank you for that. Final question, the book that you most often gift to your friends, family, or colleagues?
It's The Drama of the Gifted Child. In fact, it's the only book I've ever gifted.
And the great thing about it is it's a short read. And I'm a big fan of these, get to the point, really deliver value. And, 50 pages is such that you can really dive into it, get what you want out of it, and learn from it quickly. So a great recommendation. Parham, this has been a great, fascinating conversation. Before we let you go, any last words, and how can we find out more about you?
Well, you can find out more about me on perfectpain.com, the website. You could certainly hopefully read the book. I think I found it incredibly telling that you said that in 220 episodes of your show that this is the first time that, we're diving into the mental health aspects, a little bit of the underlying currents behind of why, when, how we do things. And that is very inspiring to me and honestly just gave me even more motivation to continue talking about this because it's incredible that it's 220 episodes and there's not been a conversation about it, and it exists everywhere. Just you look at the recent suicides, it just happens every day. There's somebody blowing themselves up, very successful and battling really severe depression that nobody knew.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, everything that we talked about will be found on the show notes for this episode. Thank you so much, Parham, for coming on and really introducing a topic that absolutely we need to talk about more often. Thank you for spending time and being this week's Modern Leader.
It was an absolute pleasure.
All right. Well, what did you think of that? A very unique topic for the podcast, like we talked about at the end. It's been a lot of episodes. We haven't brought this up, and mostly we didn't bring it up because I was afraid to kind of tiptoe around the topic. And, as I talked with Parham, and we decided to just go right after it and to really have this conversation, which I think is important for us to kind of consider and see what's out there. I see a lot of businesses self-sabotaging as they get to certain levels because mentally they're not prepared to get there. And so hopefully through this conversation, through some of the things that we talked about, you can identify within your life and in your business any obstacles, mental barriers that you're finding difficulty breaking through, and that you can identify the root causes of it and do what needs to be done to take yourself to the next level. Of course, as I mentioned, everything that we talked about can be found on the show notes for this episode, which are found at jakeacarlson.com/ML94, episode 94. And until next week, I will wish you the very best of days, an even better life. Surround yourself with awesome people, and of course, stay awesome yourself. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.